Today let's talk a little bit about relationships, and specifically, what's it like to be dependent or interdependent in a relationship? What does it mean to be dependent, and what does this word need? What does it mean to need somebody? And what are good types of need and less good types of need? Types of need that lead to the growth of the individuals and the potential of what that relationship can mean for the community in which it's embedded, as well as the kinds of needs that lead to the disintegration of the individuals through time, and perhaps the disintegration of the communities of which they're a part. So I'd like to talk about an idea called the journey to interdependence, where you move from dependence up to interdependence, and talk about the difference between dependence and interdependence, and how they can look the same while being very different. And what are the impact of that? How can you use these ideas to examine your own relationships, increase your own choices that lead to ever-increasing thriving? So, the journey from dependence to interdependence. Well, first let's define some terms. Right? First, dependence. What does it mean to be dependent on someone or have a relationship of dependence? Well, different people define it differently. The way I'm going to define it is that being dependent on someone means that you give them authority to determine your worth or value as a person. You allow them to validate you. And so when you have a relationship of dependence on someone, their judgment of you determines how you feel about yourself. They become a type of authority, so that if they love you, if they say that you're good, if they give you, and tell you you're beautiful and you're kind, when they tell you that, you take that as an authority. You allow them to determine your value. And so you're dependent on their judgment. If they judge you as good, then you're good. And if they judge you as bad, then it's horrible. Or if they're judging you as good, and then they leave, you're left with a hole, because who are you? Are you still good, without them telling you that you're good? So that's a relationship of dependence. Now, when we move from dependence to codependence, we could say that they're the flip side of the coin. And the way I like to think about codependence is that codependence is that when you get an experience of value or status or importance when someone else is dependent on your judgment. When you validate someone else and get a position of power, a position of authority, a position of importance, you become good because of your ability to impact someone else. That's what we're calling codependence. And codependence is, again, the flip side of dependence, because when you're codependent with someone, you take care of them. You provide them with the validation that they need. You protect them from the consequences of their actions. You're the one who supports them. They become dependent on you, and therefore you have an experience of being important, of being valuable. Without you, where would they be? So that's the experience of codependence. Now, when we move from codependence to counterdependence, right, we say, well, counterdependence is not being dependent on someone, quote. So counterdependence is a rebellion against what somebody else wants for you. So if someone else wants you to be a particular way, you're another way. You define yourself as not being dependent on someone. And you prove it by doing the things that they don't like. So if they want you to dress conservatively, you dress goth. If they want you to be very concerned about their well-being, you don't care about them. Right? So you're counterdependent. Now, counterdependence is sometimes confused with independence, and I'll get to that in a second. But the key about counterdependence is that you're still defining yourself, your value, based on someone else's opinion. It's just whereas with dependence, your value is determined on what they think of you. With counterdependence, your value is based on the fact that you don't need their value and that you prove it by doing something opposite, or you prove it by not caring. Right? So it's the focus is still on the other, and you define your sense of self, your sense of value, based on what they think. Now, which leads us to independence. You notice I have different lines around independence, because independence is another beast. It's another step. Independence, and I borrow this definition from Robert McDonald, the Talos Center, a wonderful teacher who I'm deeply indebted to, Robert Rocks. He defines independence as doing what you want to do, even if your parents want you to do it. Right? Doing what you want to do, even if your parents want you to do it. And you notice that that's what distinguishes independence from counterdependence. Right? Independence, you don't have to not do something just because someone who's trying to define you is trying to, you don't have to fight against them. You just do what you want to do because you want to do it. And if it fits what other people like, great. If it doesn't fit whatever other people like, great. Your sense of self is simply just not associated with what other people are thinking of you. Right? And so that's independence. Now, I want to talk about one idea that fits all of these descriptions that I'm going to talk about. Now that we've got the difference between dependence and counterdependence and codependence and independence, I want to talk about the difference between when someone is judging yourself, your person, right, your value as a human being, versus judging your behavior or your actions or your skills. So for example, if there is an expert in a particular sport that you care about, or a particular business, or a hobby, right? There's something that you, some skill or some activity that you're engaged in, and an expert judges you. They're judging your skill or your actions or your behavior. They're not judging the worth of your person. And so they're not validating your person. They're evaluating your skills. And so if an expert judges you and you take that into account and you say, I trust their judgment around my skills, that's not a relationship of dependence. That's a relationship of respect for their expertise versus their authority over yourself. So the difference between skills or actions or behavior and yourself, your self-worth, your value as a person, as a being, is a central key here. The world of dependence, codependence, counterdependence, independence, and interdependence, the focus is on where you get your sense of self. And with dependence, counterdependence, and codependence, you get your sense of self, your value as a person versus your skills or your behaviors, from your relationship with other people. Either because they're judging you, and so you accept their judgment, dependence, or you're judging them, and they accept it, and so you have a position of authority over their self, codependence, or you are not being who they are, and you get your sense of self from not being who they are, counterdependence. Versus independence, where do you get your sense of self? From you. I look at myself and I say, I'm a good person. I did something really bad there. My behaviors, my actions, my skills in that area were not good, but I'm still a good person. My sense of self is independent of other people's judgments. All right, so those are the first four stages, and that leads to the fifth stage, which is interdependence. What is interdependence? Well, we could say interdependence is not independence because it's actually about being connected with another person. It's about partnering with another person. You're interdependent. But it's not dependence because your sense of self, your self-value is not on the line. So I like to say that the purpose of independence is interdependence. Right? Independence is what allows you to have an interdependent relationship. It's what allows you to connect with someone and say, I'm going to bring my independent self, where the question is not on the line of who I am I valuable? It's just not a question that's being asked. What's being asked is, what are the skills and actions and behaviors that I bring to the table? And what are the skills, actions, and beliefs you bring to the table? And how can we combine those so that in the realm of action, in the realm of speaking, in the realm of caring and insight and being able to see one another and understand one another and create understandings and projects and values? How can we work together to do something beyond what we could do on our own? How can we use our complementary talents to create something beyond ourselves? And we call that a relationship of interdependence. And there might be financial interdependence, there might be business interdependence, there might be certain projects or goals, there might be an understanding of my emotional being where I'm not getting myself validated, but I am getting my emotions understood in a way that I get a better sense of myself and I know that you know me. Sometimes I like to call this intimacy. Intimacy is fundamentally an interdependent act. To the degree that dependence slips into intimacy, it distorts it, it turns it into pseudo-intimacy. Because the difference between interdependence and dependence, between interdependence and any of the dependent forms, is that my sense of self is always at risk in the relationship. Because if I'm dependent on someone to judge me as good, what happens if I upset them? Well, then they might not judge me as good. I can't risk that because my sense of self is at stake. And so what happens is I lose my capacity to truly bring the truth of who I am to the relationship because I can't risk it. And so what happens is I start to create a persona, a posture. I try to fit myself into their needs. And in that way, I'm not bringing myself to the relationship. And because I'm not bringing myself, I can't be interdependent. Because interdependent is two selves coming together to create something beyond one another. And so dependence reduces my capacity to bring myself to the relationship. Well, in the same way with codependence. Because if this person is dependent on my judgment, if I'm the one who's supporting them, if I'm the one who makes their life workable, possible, and I take pride in that, well then I can't share my full truth with them because I might lose my position of authority and status. There's a whole bunch of ways of being in a relationship with them that I can't do. Because if I do, then I lose my position of authority and power and importance. And so there are all types of things that I can't do in that relationship, again, which limits who I am, which limits the type of interdependence that I can build. Same thing with, of course, counterdependence. I can't do certain things because they might like it, and then I'd be giving in to the man, right? I'd be selling myself out. It's only when you're independent, when your sense of self isn't on the line, that you can then bring your full self to a relationship and find out where the interdependence is possible. So the difference between interdependence and dependence is that in dependence your sense of self is on the line, and in interdependence your values and your capacity to create is on the line. Now interdependence is still quite tricky, quite valuable, quite an accomplishment to build a truly interdependent relationship. Now, often we have mixtures of these. We're a little bit dependent, we're a little bit codependent, we're a little bit counterdependent. We've got some independence and we've got some interdependence. By recognizing each of these different styles of relating and noticing what the impact of them are, we can begin to examine our own relationships and notice, well, where are we dependent? Where are we codependent? Where are we counterdependent? Where are we independent? Right? Because interdependent doesn't necessarily lead to interdependence, but interdependence is not truly possible without independence. So we might discover that in some areas we're dependent, in other areas we're interdependent. We can notice the feeling difference between that, the quality of what it's like when our self is on the line versus when it's not. And then we can systematically clear those issues up. Whether you do it through coaching, or you do it through some type of transformational course, or you do it through meditation or therapy, whatever it is you need to do, the more you can resolve your issues of dependence, the more you can step into independence and have the potential of creating interdependence. And so this journey of interdependence is a way of thinking about relationships that some people have found helpful. I hope you have. Again, I'm Mark Michael Lewis, head coach of the Game of Thriving, where the more you play, the better your life gets. And you can visit me on gameofthriving.com if you like this and you want more.